Hi, I'm Mike Hulvey, President and CEO of the RAB, and welcome to Radio on Main Street, the podcast all about radio. We recently attended the annual NAB Show in Las Vegas. Over a 5-day period, this convention brought together over 55,000 attendees, 1,100 exhibitors, along with featured keynotes and informative sessions focused on topics relevant to broadcasting, media, advertising, and entertainment. There were lots of discussions around both challenges and opportunities facing radio, along with some key takeaways around the industry's One Voice for Radio initiative. And truly, it is making us better together. I did have the opportunity to sit down with thought leaders from around the industry to talk about their plans for the future and how they are collaborating with the RAB, advertisers, and fellow broadcasters to continue to transform the business. A big thank you to Enco and Benstown for allowing us to bring Radio on Main Street podcasts to the NAB Show exhibit floor yet again this year. In episode 3 of our series, you will hear the discussion that I had with Borrell Associates Chief Executive Officer Gordon Borrell, just prior to us joining a few broadcasters for a session around the digital advertising landscape. We left the podcast floor and went into a standing room only venue. It was quite an experience. Gordon, you are looking at today's radio. Like we've evolved into video. We're using all sorts of different technologies to tell stories, to engage with the audience, including all of the audience that's here today. I appreciate you stopping by.
I'm happy to be here. I'm impressed. It used to be, it's radio, look into the microphone, right? Now it's radio, look into the lights and the cameras and the action.
We have started 2025 in what I would say is a collaborative environment for the radio industry, and you've been a part of that, and I thank you for that. From your perspective, and we're going to talk about some of the research pieces that you're doing here at NAB. You're involved in a number of different initiatives. You and I and an all-star group will be on a panel later on this day to talk about these subjects. But I'd be interested in your view of kind of the state of where we are here in the radio audio space.
It's really impressive when you come to a show like this to see the vitality of the radio industry. Competitors not so enthusiastic about their own future in the print space and in direct mail space, which is still a competitor. But you come here and it's really impressive, and really the spirit of radio, the positivity of radio, which you embody, by the way, in a great way. So you're such a great spokesman for the industry. It really is impressive. And I'll couch that by saying, you know me, generally cynical, generally skeptical of everything. So, wow. All I can say is, wow, this is just an impressive show, and radio being a central part of it. We talk about numbers. You know, we look at radio and we see high levels of consumption. And the challenge that we see is investment levels. And a lot of the work that I see being done across many companies, matter of fact, a COO of one just walked by, a large broadcaster, people are willing to work on the core issues in terms of some of the storytelling and in terms of some of the data that needs to move in the right directions. Again, and I look at that delta between consumption and investment, and certainly it's something that radio has to figure out. Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because this morning at exactly 8:55 a.m. here in Las Vegas, I wrote down a couple of quotes that I had heard that were just remarkable to me and interesting. One was, "I love radio. Our brightest days are ahead of us." And I went, I wonder how many in the industry really feel that way. You know, the oppressiveness of today's environment that's so competitive. And then I heard another quote that said, "We invest in the future. It's the only way we're going to survive in the broadcast industry." You know who said that?
I think I know who said that.
Yes, you did.
I did.
Just a short while ago to the National Alliance of Broadcasters Associations. And that is just so important. We invest in the future. So I'm going to turn the tables on you, buddy. Do you really believe that's true? You asked me a question, and I think we're kind of thinking here, it's not enough. Is that the way you feel?
No, how I really believe is that we have more ways now to touch audience than we ever have had before. You know, I go back to my stump speech, if you will, and that was, you know, in the old days, radio used to be an appliance, Gordon. It was great. I mean, it was broadcasting in its purest form. You know, I'll zero it down to a farmhouse in central Illinois. My grandmother, and I guess my grandmother introduced me to radio. Because when I would go to my grandmother out on her farm, she had a radio, and she would listen to WJBC, which is now a Cumulus media station, but then an independent broadcast station in Bloomington, Illinois, and she listened to that radio station religiously. There were conversations that we didn't have when I was visiting my grandmother because a certain program was coming on the air. Like, that's a beautiful, romantic time. In radio, if you look at it, is a mass reach, you know, entity. Over time, what we didn't have then, what we have now, is we now have the ability to touch our listeners in so many ways, in so many places, and that we're thinking differently. Like this conversation today here, thanks to our friends at INCO, on the floor of the NAB, is a video and audio production. Radio's opening their eyes up to video opportunities. We're opening our eyes up to different things. We see so many conversations that go to podcasting. We had a very interesting session, you know, here at the conference yesterday. Pierre was talking about it from the perspective of how people are using podcasting and how we're touching with podcasting. We're seeing that grow. The economic models have to catch up to consumption there too. So when I say I think bright futures are ahead, I believe that because technology is going to enable us to continue to connect in ways we haven't. But the core of what we do with our audio, with our transmitters, with our core radio audience is still something that a lot of people do not have.
Yeah, well, look, I think the truth of the matter is that the radio is not investing what it should. When you take a look at any of the publicly held radio companies' statements, their financial statements, there's not a single line for R&D. If you look at Alphabet, Google, if you look at Meta, you know how much they're investing in R&D? This is going to be a heart attack for people in the radio industry, or any industry probably outside of, you know, Silicon Valley. They're investing more than half. I'm going to slow down for effect, Mike. They're investing more than half of their expenses in R&D. Tell me what radio station would do that. So, okay, that might be unrealistic. You don't have the Silicon Valley money. How about, I don't know, what Netflix does? Netflix is a poster child of transformation. Remember them 20 years ago, what Netflix was? We were all putting CDs in the frickin' mail and sending them back, and they would send us another one. How archaic is that? What is Netflix today? Something completely different. How much do they invest in R&D? This is all I'm asking for the radio industry. 10%. Right? There's Jim Brown in the audience, 10%. Jim's the one who pulled up these numbers. Hey, look at this, Netflix. You know, you don't have to invest 50% of your total expenses. That's heart attack level. Your profits are wiped out. How about 10%? Can radio do that? I think investment in a set like this, thank you, NCO, great company. What, 6 figures maybe? Would a radio station be willing to transform?
Jim's negotiating for Borrell with what you see right here.
Would a radio station be willing to transform, invest $100,000 or more to transform into a video company? I mean, that seems like a pretty cheap investment in the scheme of things, and suddenly compete with television maybe in the marketplace. I think it would be a wise investment, and that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Look at how you can transform your company. I see radio really needing to do that and do it more.
In your research, and we work every year on a very important piece of data, the digital benchmark report. This year, I think we exceeded engagement in terms of with broadcasters who are sharing data. You talk to local advertisers, you talk to a cross-section of individuals, and you share things. What were some of your key takeaways for us from the most recent report, and what are some trends that we need to be paying attention to?
Well, we've done this for 13, 14, 15 years now, so there are a lot of trends that you can see over time. So it's almost laughable to see where the industry was 15 years ago as compared with where it is today. It's a very good, solid position today, and I think it took the pandemic to kick people in the pants to be able to say, oh, wow, there's no radio to sell because nobody is in their car because the pandemic has shut everything down. Let's look around for what else we can. Oh, hey, there's some digital stuff to sell, and it took off. So, that was a really good transformative period, that economic trigger that the pandemic gave us for radio to really understand that, hey, there can be some significant revenue. Now, 24% of total ad revenue comes from digital, driven by digital sales. So the things, to answer your question, the things that we saw that are troublesome signatures of, something ahead that we really need to fix, they're opportunities. One is there's a shift back toward training. Managers told us, I think we interviewed over 200 of them representing thousands and thousands of stations, that the number one thing, we asked them to pick one thing, the number one thing that would drive more digital sales. And over the past 3-4 years, it had been, we need more products to sell, we need more people to help us sell digital. Now it's training. It's shifted back to training. So that's number one. Digital training is becoming more important. The other is strategy. People were signaling, managers again, were signaling that digital strategies and overall station strategies needed to be revisited. It used to be that they were, really, really good to brilliant. That's what managers felt their digital strategies were. And then the others said, it's fair, so, maybe not so good. Now the majority, or the greater portion, think it's not so good, which signals, now it's time to revisit. And strategies probably need to be revisited maybe even every year, every 2 years at least, for adjustment, just because the world is changing so much. Those were the top two things I thought, the industry probably needs to stop, reassess things, and do a little more training to be competitive and reassess their strategy.
What I found interesting over the years in your survey is how we're perceived from the ad community, from the client level. And this is all local. I mean, these conversations are all about local. What are you seeing in trend-wise from radio's perception from the ad community? In particular with our sellers.
Yeah. It's always been fairly high in terms of marketing. And so you can take that back 10 or 20 years ago, and advertisers saw radio folks as being very personable, and they are. I mean, compare someone from the radio industry, I hate to do this to my newspaper friends, to someone from the newspaper industry. Black and white versus really colorful and, engaging and storytellers and everything else. And that's not an unfair assessment. That's the way that they felt. Television was in kind of a different class, but still radio rose above it. And that's pretty much always been true. Now we see radio in a very high position, come from behind position in digital. So what that means is local advertisers are perceiving. And what's fascinating, Mike, about this is that these are people who don't even buy radio advertising. These are just advertisers who don't buy radio, and radio advertisers, of course, saying, we perceive those radio sellers to be pretty good in digital and seem to know a lot. That's a very leverageable and very positive thing for the industry when advertisers, the people who are funding 100% pretty much of your station's operations, see you as very powerful in both marketing expertise, from which they're all clamoring for, by the way. They need to know where to put their money. They have so many options now, so many more than they did 10 or 20 years ago. So they're looking for answers. And what to do with digital. Whether I should advertise on TikTok or whether advertise on Facebook, and does search engine optimization work better than search engine marketing? They're looking for answers for these things. So that's where training comes back into play. That's why it's so important that the radio seller doesn't answer the question, hey, should I be advertising on TikTok, with a blank stare.
Personal question, how did you get started in this business? How did you land here today?
How did I land here today? Well, let's go way back when my mother used to edit my letters that I sent to her dutifully from Boy Scout camp, telling me I had wrong verb tense and, I misspelled something. That put me into the newspaper industry as a journalist, which made me determine pretty quickly there wasn't enough money being a journalist. And I got into the media business, working for a big company, working with radio, TV, and newspapers that they owned, and magazines. And then I determined, hey, I could make a lot more money teaching people back in the late 90s, early 2000s about disruptive innovation, disruptive technologies. and how to respond to them. Here we are today in this wonderful setting with you, Mike, and all these great people in the broadcast industry. So back from my mom redlining my Boy Scout letters to today.
Well, earlier today you referenced, we spoke to NASBA, which is, for those that are unfamiliar, it's the National Alliance of the State Broadcast Associations, and they had a meeting this morning, and Gordon and I were both in that meeting, and I shared, I was 8 when my on-air light came on, and I saw my first radio broadcast. I'll never forget it. And it literally changed my life. Like, it set the course for my life. And I don't know what it was, if it was the romance of it, if it was in an athletic event. I like sports, but there was just something about that set me on a course. And when I was 14, someone let me in the building, and I've never been out, ever.
Yeah.
Radio's been a part of my life the entire time. So you never know where people start. I always find it an interesting question.
I was a newspaper reporter, which I described earlier, newspapers as kind of being black and white and kind of dull. But they're very smart people. But I was thrust into, when I made the change, being a program director. And I actually had to sit in front of a microphone and come up with a radio voice, and then do a program for Christmas where I was the voice of, please don't ask me to do it, Albert the Elf. So yeah, all of that, the whole experience got me hooked, because I think the industry is full of really bright people. They're telling stories, they're doing good for their communities. The wonderful stories that come out of radio in particular, helping communities during tragedies and storms and things like that. The money that's raised by radio and all broadcast media and newspapers, as well. I think it's a great, great industry to be in.
One final moment here with our time together. If you had a single message that you wanted to send to this industry, what would it be?
Oh man, so many things go through my head.
You only get one.
Yeah, and most of them would be censored.
I mean, I know you're cynical. You've already said that, but you do have an appreciation for radio.
I would just say this: if you really want to transform your company, and you're not the owner with the hand on the purse strings, you have a job, and that is to get to that person, to get that message somehow to that person. Because, Mike, I really believe that the future is in the hands of the people who own radio companies and television companies and newspaper companies and cable companies, etc. If they want to make that transformation, if they want to survive, if they want to see their net revenue to grow, they need to be able to pass that mirror test to grow again. And the only opportunity that I see for that is being really, really strong in your digital assets and the digital content and programming that you have and the digital sales capability. And you're not going to get there through small incremental growth. You're going to get there through exponential growth, and that's going to require an investment. So I think that's the big message I would like to carry forth in the industry, is get that investment, get the commitment from the corporation to invest more than out of your expenses. It can't come out of expenses, operating expenses. It has to come out of corporate investment. And that message needs to get to the ownership, and I think that's important.
Well, Gordon, thank you for spending time with us. You got to love the set here with Inco at NAB.
Beautiful. Look at all these people.
I know. Literally, they were flying in earlier today when we came on the floor.
Like Black Friday at Walmart, didn't it?
Big sales. Well, we thank you for joining us on this edition of the Radio on Main Street podcast. Our guest, Gordon Borrell, and we thank him very much.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Conversations with Gordon Borrell are always illuminating, full of insights, and most importantly, chock full of actionable steps that are both proactive and at times reactive as to how radio can continue to serve its local advertising clients and provide them with unique and effective integrated digital solutions. Now, what's key is to stay ahead of all of it and continue to invest in the future, as well as training for your sales team, as that ensures that they are the expert marketing and advertising solution providers to your local clients.
If you'd like to learn more about radio and its many benefits, we invite you to visit us at rab.com, or you can email us directly at askrab@rab.com. Until next time, it's Radio on Main Street.